I'll never forget the moment I finally snapped. It was a rainy Tuesday in Portland, the kind of day where the sky just weeps. I stood in my kitchen staring at a crumpled $2 bill on the counter. It was the last cash I had after paying our insane $60,000 mortgage and a mountain of bills. That lone $2 bill looked pitiful, a tiny green lifeline in a sea of overdue notices. I'm Jenna, 32 years old. I work as a graphic designer making around $75,000 a year, and my husband, Nate, earns about $20,000 as a mechanic. With nearly $200,000 combined income, you'd think we'd be comfortable. But somehow, we were broke. Our bank account was a ghost town. Money was vanishing faster than we made it, and I felt like I was drowning in debt with no clue why. It started with little things. I'd ask Nate for grocery money and he'd just shrug and mumble, "I'm tapped out." On that salary, we had a system. I covered the mortgage and utilities. He covered groceries, clothes, and our kids' needs. Yet every month I was dipping into my savings to keep us afloat. My emergency fund was evaporating like a puddle under the sun. Meanwhile, our 3 kids, all under 10, were eating cereal for dinner most nights. I watered down milk to make it last and even reused tea bags to save pennies. The kids jokingly called it breakfast for dinner, trying to make me smile, but it broke my heart. They deserved better than our constant struggle. Bills piled up on the counter, and I started sending the utility company's calls to voicemail. Every morning I woke up with a knot of anxiety, watching our money disappear into thin air. I was desperate to find out why. That Tuesday, I cracked. The rain pounded on the roof as I marched to the garage, fueled by anger and fear. Nate was hunched over the engine of his old Mustang, tinkering away. He looked up as I burst in, dripping wet and furious. "Where's all our money going, Nate?" I demanded, voice shaking. My words bounced off the garage walls. He paused, then casually said, "Unexpected expenses," without even looking at me. "Unexpected expenses?" I snapped. "We can't afford groceries. The kids are living on cereal. What expenses, Nate?" He finally met my eyes, irritation all over his face. "Drop it, Jenna. I've got it under control," he shot back. Under control? I could, barely contain myself. "We have $2 left to our name. How is that under control?" Nate's jaw clenched. Instead of answering, he turned back to the Mustang's engine, effectively shutting me out. His silence was a slap in the face. Stood there shaking with rage and betrayal. He was hiding something, and he refused to talk. Finally, I turned and left, slamming the door behind me. My hands trembled as I collapsed into a kitchen chair. I stared at that pathetic $2 bill through hot tears. This wasn't how our life was. Supposed to be. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the dark living room. My mind wouldn't stop racing. If Nate wouldn't give me answers, I'd find them myself. I opened our joint bank account online, something I hadn't done in ages. The page loaded and my heart nearly stopped. Multiple $5,000 transfers had been sent out, one every month, all labeled family support, family support. $5,000 a month to someone and not a word to me? We were his family. Who was he giving our money to? I scrolled back through 2 years of statements, each transaction fueling my panic. Tens of thousands of dollars, gone. My mind raced through wild possibilities. Was Nate secretly supporting someone else? A second family? A gambling debt? None of it made sense. I shut the laptop, nearly dropping it. A cold resolve settled over me, cutting through the panic. This was betrayal, plain and simple. I was done being in the dark. I needed help. Tomorrow I'd call my best friend Mia, an accountant who could help me unravel this mess. Together we would get to the bottom of it. I looked again at that $2 bill, a symbol of how low we'd been brought. I promised myself I would find the truth, no matter how ugly. Little did I know, the real storm was just beginning. By the next morning, my desperation had turned into a plan. I was going to trace every dollar. I called my best friend Mia, and she rushed over with her laptop. Over coffee at my kitchen table, we became amateur detectives. We combed through the bank statements and cross-checked our phone records. Sure enough, every $5,000 transfer coincided with a call from Nate to a Seattle number. My stomach twisted at the familiar area code. Only one person we knew in Seattle. Linda, my mother-in-law. Mia's jaw dropped when I told her. "Your Mill? The fancy Seattle lady?" she asked. I nodded, heart pounding. This was beyond bizarre. Linda was a wealthy widow who flaunted her money. She lived in a luxury condo, vacationed in Maui and Cancun, and posted photos sipping champagne on cruises. She wasn't just comfortable, she was loaded. So why on earth was Nate secretly sending Her $5,000 every month? To be certain, I needed more proof. Using Nate's known passcode, I unlocked his phone and opened his text messages. There it was, a recent thread with Mom. Just last week, Nate had texted, "Sent the usual 5Ks. Her reply made my blood boil. "Thanks, darling. Booked a spa day." I almost threw the phone across the room. Linda was using our money for spa days while I pinched pennies for groceries. I felt a surge of rage and heartbreak. Mia squeezed my hand. "This is insane," she murmured. I could only nod, throat tight. That evening, anger propelled me into confronting Nate face to face. Once the kids were in bed, I cornered him in the living room. My voice shook, but I kept it as steady as I could. "Nate, why are you sending your mom $5,000 every month?" He froze, eyes wide, like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Jenna, she needs help," he stammered. "Help?" I snapped. "She lives in a penthouse and we can barely buy groceries. How could you do this?" My words came out harsher than I intended, but I was hurt and furious. Nate's face went ashen. He looked away and mumbled, "You don't understand. Just drop it." Drop it? Seriously? I could feel tears of frustration in my eyes. Before I could say another word, he bolted down the hallway. A second later, I heard the bedroom door slam and the lock click. He'd literally shut me out. I stood there shaking, adrenaline coursing through me. I had never felt so alone in my marriage. If Nate wouldn't explain, I had to find answers on my own. The next morning, still reeling, I drove to my parents' place in Salem. They welcomed me with worried faces and warm hugs. Through sobs of anger and hurt, I told them everything. My dad's hands curled into fists. "That woman is bleeding you dry," he growled. My mom held me, seething quietly on my behalf. They had always loved Nate, but this was beyond the pale. "You have to put a stop to this, Jenna. We'll help however we can," Mom said softly. On the drive back, my fury only grew. My parents had sacrificed so much to help us over the years, and here was Linda robbing us blind despite having plenty of her own. The injustice made my blood boil. When I got home, I noticed a new pile of mail on the counter, bills and a bank statement. Nate must have forgotten to hide. With shaking fingers, I opened the statement. It showed a transfer of $6,000 out of our savings, dated about a month ago. An even larger payment. I swallowed hard. What was going on last month? I quickly checked Linda's social media around that date. Sure enough, she had posted a picture flaunting a brand new BMW with the caption, "Spoiled myself today." My mouth fell open in disgust. That $6,000 had basically paid for her new car. I felt physically ill realizing how directly our stolen money was fueling her lifestyle. This had moved beyond mere financial help or family duty. This felt like outright betrayal and exploitation. I clutched the bank statement and that smug Instagram post, anger and confusion twisting inside me. Why would Nate enable this? None of it made sense unless a chilling thought crept in. What if simple greed wasn't the whole story? What if Linda had some hold over Nate, something so serious he felt he had no choice but to keep paying her? The idea sent a shiver down my spine. What hold could Linda have on her own son? A dark possibility formed in my mind. Maybe she was blackmailing him with something from his past. I had no proof, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a deeper secret was lurking beneath all this. Steeling myself with a deep breath, I made up my mind. I was going to Seattle to get the truth from Linda, come hell or high water. It was time to shine a light on whatever dark secret was hiding behind all this, no matter what. The next days were a blur of anger and suspicion. Nate barely spoke to me, and the house felt like a cold war zone. I hardly slept, living on coffee and adrenaline, obsessed with finding answers. I scoured years of our financial records, searching our 10-year marriage for any missed clues. Nate's secretive streak about money now looked like a series of red flags I'd ignored. I was desperate to see how long this had been happening. In the attic, digging through dusty old files, I struck gold. I found an envelope with Linda's handwriting on it. Inside was a note that read, "Don't forget who helped you. L." My breath caught at the words. That note felt less like kindness and more like a threat. Behind it was a deposit slip for $15,000 into Nate's account from 9 years ago, right before our wedding. My stomach lurched. Questions flooded my mind. Our marriage had started with a secret $15,000 debt to Linda. Why had he needed that money, and why keep it secret from me? I needed perspective, so I called my sister Tara, who never liked Linda. Tara wasn't surprised at all. "She's been pulling his strings forever," Tara said bitterly. She reminded me how Linda had meddled in our lives before, like pressuring Nate to quit a job he enjoyed, because it wasn't prestigious enough. She's manipulative as hell. None of this shocks me, Tara added. It was clear Linda always wanted to control him. Everything clicked into place. She'd been the puppeteer, and Nate had been dancing to her tune for years. That night, I confronted Nate with the letter and deposit slip. He looked absolutely defeated and finally confessed, "Mom loaned me that money when I was broke. I've been paying her back every month." I was floored. "So you've been secretly paying her back all this time, without telling me?" My heart pounded in my ears as I waited for his answer. He nodded, staring at the floor, looking smaller, and more ashamed than I'd ever seen him. "She told me not to tell you," he whispered. Hearing that, something in me broke. All the anger I'd been holding in came bursting out. I slammed my hand on the table. "This is insane, Nate. Your mother lives in luxury and you're making our kids suffer for it?" I shouted, voice cracking. "How could you hide this from me?" He just shook his head and muttered, "I'm sorry, but it wasn't enough." Then he did the worst thing possible. He turned and walked out the front door, disappearing into the night. He left me standing, there in the silent kitchen, shattered and furious. The slam of the door echoed through the night as I sank into a chair, my hands shaking with rage. Later, my daughter Lily found me quietly sobbing at the kitchen table. "Mommy, are you and Daddy okay?" she asked, her big eyes full of worry, as she clutched her teddy bear. It broke my heart that she even had to ask. I hugged her tightly and wiped my tears. "We're going to be okay," I promised her softly. "Mommy and Daddy just have some grown-up things to work out. It's not your fault, sweetie." She nodded and let me tuck her back into bed. As I closed her door, I felt a surge of resolve. Inside, I was seething that Linda's actions had brought this turmoil into our home. I had to protect my kids from this mess. My little girl's worried face steeled my resolve even further. I was going to end this nightmare for my family. That same night, I called Mia to update her. Furious on my behalf, she helped me dig deeper into Linda's finances for more ammo. What we found blew my mind. Linda's downtown condo alone was worth around $900,000, and she had 2 rental properties worth over $1 million combined. She was swimming in money, filthy rich by any standard. This confirmed it. Linda's demands weren't about need at all. It was about power and control. She was essentially using us as her personal ATM, playing puppet master with our lives. I couldn't believe the numbers I was seeing. Lying in bed after everyone else was asleep, I realized this twisted family drama had gone far enough. I was done being scared and victimized. If Nate couldn't stand up to his mother, I would. I made up my mind to confront Linda face to face and get the truth no matter what. Enough was enough. I was going to Seattle to end her grip on us and finally get answers. Confronting Linda wouldn't be easy. I was nervous as hell. But my anger was bigger than my fear. I was ready for whatever came next. I'd had enough of secrets. That weekend, I decided to confront the source head-on, Linda. I drove to Seattle without telling Nate, adrenaline and anger propelling me forward. When I arrived at Linda's luxury high-rise, she greeted me at her door with polite surprise, draped in a silk robe. Her condo was pure luxury, marble floors, a panoramic view of the bay, and not a sign of financial worry in sight. She even had the nerve to offer me tea as if this were a casual social call. I declined. I skipped the small talk. "Why is Nate sending you $5,000 every month, Linda?" I asked flatly, getting right to the point. She blinked, and for a split second I caught a flicker of irritation in her eyes, before a patronizing smile spread on her lips. "He's helping his mother. Family support, dear. Surely you understand family loyalty." My temper flared. "Loyalty? Our kids are eating cereal for dinner while you're living in a penthouse and booking spa days. You don't need his money. And you know it." Her face hardened just a touch. "Need has nothing to do with it," she replied coolly. "Nathan owes me. I raised him alone, paid for his education, sacrificed for him. This is how he repays that debt. It's between us." Felt my hands trembling. "He has a family now. Your arrangement is hurting us. It stops now." Linda arched an eyebrow, a smug grin tugging at her lips. "And what will you do if he doesn't stop, Jenna? Nathan knows his obligations." She practically purred, confident I was powerless. Her nerve was unbelievable, but I refused to be intimidated. I leaned in, voice low and seething. "Watch me, Linda. I'm done letting you bleed us dry." With that, I turned on my heel and left her standing in her gilded living room, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding as I walked to my car, and I realized I was shaking with rage. The confrontation only confirmed what I suspected. Linda felt entitled to Nate's money and had zero shame about it. She practically dared me to try to stop her. On the drive home, I called Mia to vent. I relayed the highlights of the showdown, in a rush of angry words. She basically said he owes her and I should butt out, I fumed. Mia was outraged but stayed focused. Check Nate's email, she urged. Maybe there's proof in writing of what she's up to. That night, long after the house was quiet, I opened Nate's laptop with shaking fingers. I knew his email password. We had shared it for a vacation booking once and he never changed it. I held my breath and typed Linda's name into his inbox. Search bingo. A short email thread between Nate and his mother popped up. My eyes zeroed in on one from her about a year ago. Don't tell Jenna, she'll overreact. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Right below it was Nate's reply. I know, it's handled. Reading their casual exchange about keeping me in the dark made my skin crawl. There was an attachment on that email. I clicked it and a scanned document opened. It was an IOU, a promissory note dated 2010. Nate had signed a document promising to repay Linda $50,000 with repayment ongoing, scrawled at the bottom next to his signature. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. $50,000? In 2010, the year after we married? We never had that kind of money. It was the year after we married. What had Linda covered for Nate? What secret was worth 50Ks and years of silent payback? None of the possibilities, in my mind, were good. I had to stifle a gasp as I realized how dark this might be. My hands were ice cold as reality set in. This wasn't just her milking him for fun. This was leverage. Blackmail. Linda had something on Nate. Something big. She had him trapped, dancing on her strings to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. I carefully forwarded those incriminating emails and the IOU to myself for safekeeping. My mind raced with possibilities and my heart was pounding. Nate hadn't just been a dutiful son. He was a trapped one. As I closed the laptop, one thought blazed in my mind. Whatever Linda was holding over Nate, I was going to expose it. She thought I was overreacting? She hadn't seen anything yet. I was far from done. My fight was only beginning, and I was going to uncover the truth no matter what. At sunrise, I confronted Nate with the evidence I'd found. I held up the printed IOU and demanded the full truth. He finally broke down and confessed. When he was 20, he drove drunk, crashed, and injured someone. Linda paid the victims $50,000 to keep Nate out of jail. He'd been secretly repaying her ever since. She told me never to tell you, he said, eyes full of shame. I was stunned and furious. This was the dark secret Linda had used to control him. All these years he had let her bleed us for a mistake he made as a kid. Nate apologized through tears, saying he thought he was protecting me by keeping it hidden. Part of me felt sympathy for the terrified 20-year-old he had been, but I was livid at the lies and the damage to our family. One thing was clear. We were done letting Linda pull the strings. A cold sense of resolve washed over me. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was ready to fight back and make her pay. I told Nate point blank that the payments and secrecy ended today, or our marriage might not survive. He agreed without hesitation. If anything, he looked relieved. After that, I stepped outside to clear my head and called my sister Tara. She was outraged and insisted we cut Linda off completely. That same morning, he sent his mother a single text. The payments were over and we were done. Her response came minutes later in a furious call. We didn't even pick up when she called back. She left a voicemail spewing, "Ungrateful boy. After all I've done for you, you'll regret this." We both knew a storm was coming, but at least now we stood together. Linda struck back the very next day. She took to Facebook, posting a dramatic sob story about how her ungrateful son had cruelly abandoned his widowed mother. She claimed we were leaving her destitute, an utterly absurd lie given her bank account. Unfortunately, some of her friends bought her act. Nasty comments rolled in, calling Nate a horrible son and me a manipulative wife. It was infuriating, but exactly what we expected. If Linda wanted a public fight, I was ready to bring it. With Mia's help, I wrote my own post and laid out the truth. I calmly detailed how much money we'd given Linda over the years, how financially comfortable she really was, and how she'd blackmailed Nate by holding an old mistake over his head. For example, I wrote, "For years, we gave my mother-in-law $5,000 a month while she vacationed in luxury. This wasn't support, it was exploitation and blackmail. I made sure to mention that our kids had gone without things because of her. And yes, I tagged her in it. When I hit post, my hands were shaking. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Friends, family, and even acquaintances rallied to our side once they learned the truth. Next to me, Nate read the comments with tears in his eyes, realizing people finally understood our side. The tide turned against Linda swiftly. People in the comments called her out as a greedy manipulator. I felt a surge of vindication seeing others finally recognize her cruelty. Her attempt to play victim backfired spectacularly. Linda, predictably, completely lost it. She called from another number, shrieking at me to delete my post. I flatly refused. I answered once and said, "No, we're done, Linda." Then I hung up and ignored any further calls. She had lost her power over us, and she clearly didn't know how to handle it at all. As the day went on, I even got a few private messages from folks who knew her, thanking me for speaking up. One tenant of hers told me they always suspected she was exploiting people. It felt vindicating to see others recognize her for what she was. That evening, just as I thought we'd won, Mia called me, practically bursting with urgency. "Jenna, I found the police report from that old crash," she said breathlessly. It wasn't Nate driving, it was Linda. My jaw dropped. I made her repeat it twice to be sure I heard right. According to the official report, Linda had been the driver in that 2010 accident, and Nate had taken the blame to protect her. She had let her own son be labeled the drunk driver, then forced him to pay her back for the hush money. I felt sick to my stomach as the magnitude of her betrayal hit me. She hadn't just manipulated our finances, she had framed her own son for her crime and then milked him for it for years. This revelation changed everything for us. I walked back into the house clutching the printed police report that proved everything. Nate was on the couch, anxiously waiting for news. His face was streaked with tears. He'd been crying, probably thinking he'd lost me or ruined our lives. I sat down beside him and quietly placed the document in his hands. He read it, eyes widening in disbelief. It was her?" he choked out. I nodded, my own eyes brimming. "It was always her, Nate. You took the fall for your mother." The realization hit him like a punch. He broke down, sobbing openly. Between ragged breaths, he kept saying, "She told me I owed her. She told me I owed her." I wrapped my arms around him, and together we cried for the pain and betrayal that woman had caused. When we finally pulled ourselves together, a new determination took hold. We had hard proof of Linda's crime and her deception. That night, we made a few decisions. First, Nate wanted to officially report what happened, even though so much time had passed. We contacted the local police where the accident had occurred, forwarding them the evidence. Given the severity, they actually reopened the case. But we didn't stop there. We made sure everyone in our circle knew the full truth. Nate personally called a few of the people who had shamed him on Linda's behalf and set the record straight. The shockwave was intense. People who had sided with her were horrified to learn what she'd done. Linda's remaining supporters vanished overnight. The consequences for Linda were swift and deserved. With the case reopened, she faced potential legal repercussions for the old DUI and for falsifying who was driving. I don't know all the legal details, but I do know that her life began crumbling fast. Tenants from her properties banded together to file official complaints and even lawsuits for various shady practices she'd pulled on them. News of her downfall emboldened them. Some of her fancy friends who had initially sympathized with her publicly retracted their support and distanced themselves. She became a social pariah almost immediately. Within a couple of months, Linda's reign of control was fully over. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her penthouse, her pride, and joy to cover mounting legal fees and settlements. The last I heard, she was living in a much smaller place and dealing with a pile of lawsuits and investigations. Essentially, the queen of luxury was knocked off her throne. As for us, we began to heal. It wasn't instant by any means. Years of financial stress and emotional damage don't disappear overnight. But we were free. Truly free. Nate cut off all contact with his mother. He even started therapy to work through the guilt and manipulation she had instilled in him. Our home became peaceful again. We adjusted to having our full income available. It was startling and wonderful to finally see our savings account grow instead of shrink. Little by little, our family recovered. I took the kids grocery shopping and didn't have to count every penny. We replaced our children's threadbare shoes and got them new outfits, and I nearly cried seeing them so excited to have things most families would consider simple. We even started having regular pizza nights as a family, something that used to feel like an extravagant treat. The difference in our household was like night and day. The kids laughed more, Nate smiled more, and I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was carrying for so long. One sunny afternoon, a few months after the big blow-up, I found that old $2 bill tucked in my wallet. I took it out, smoothed it flat, and decided to frame it. That crumpled little bill had once represented my despair. The absolute low point where I felt like I had nothing left. Now it represents something entirely different. It's a reminder of the day I snapped, the day I stood up and fought back. Looking back on it all, I had thought I was just dealing with a greedy mother-in-law and some family financial drama. Turns out I helped unmask a criminal and end a cycle of abuse that had gone on for far too long. It's a strange thing to say, but I'm proud of myself, of us. We went through hell, but we came out the other side. As for Linda, she's finally facing the truth and consequences of her actions. And that, in the end, is the final justice. The revenge wasn't just in watching her fall. It was in reclaiming our lives. I'll never forget standing in my living room, holding that $2 bill on the day everything fell apart. And I'll never forget how it became the symbol of the day I took my life back. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought? Or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.